Now, Dr. Matthew Alford is a film producer of note. He produced The Writer with No Hands and Theatres of War, How the Pentagon and the CIA Took Hollywood. This is a subject in which I am intensely interested because I love politics and I love movies and I love television. And every time I'm watching them, I can see the hidden hand of the deep state in so many of these storylines. Dr. Alford, I'm glad to say, joins me now. Dr. Alford, thank you for joining us this evening. These films that you made are extremely important. Do tell the audience why.
Well, the most recent film that I co-produced is about the role of the military-industrial complex, or the deep state, or the national security state, however you want to call it, in rewriting Hollywood film scripts, rewriting network television shows, and we've also done some work subsequent to that on the rewriting of video games as well. Now, these rewrites are done largely for political reasons. It's not just cosmetic changes. It's often fundamental changes that are made to the whole nature of the program or show. You're showing some up on the screen now. Things that make the military look good, for example. Things that show, in the case of the day after, attempts to make it look like the United States is not provocative when it comes to nuclear weapons, or that it does not lose nuclear weapons. Things along those lines. So this most recent film, Theatres of War, the documentary, is important because we found new information that showed the extent to which the Department of Defense in particular, but also the Central Intelligence Agency, do these rewrites. At the beginning of this century, it looked like there were just a few hundred films that were made that had some kind of impact from the military. But we have now realized that there are many thousands of films, and that this was covered up by the PR organization that's in charge of this, the Entertainment Liaison Office, alongside sympathetic academics. And it's only been the last few years since our group has been able to put together this new information that's come from about 20,000 pages of Freedom of Information Act requests.
Now, do they do it openly, Doctor, or covertly? I mean, and why do the filmmakers agree to it? Is it money or is it fear?
It's not really fear. It's they do save money by, if they want to have Black Hawk helicopters, for example, or if you want to have an aircraft carrier, or just free men and advice. It's a really good way of getting of having that very cheaply. The military benefits because it gives them opportunities to recruit, but also more on and they do admit that. They admit that they're keen to recruit people, but on the quiet, they're also reshaping history. And our whole perception of what American foreign policy is in these thousands of different productions. The Hollywood producers themselves, they like it because they save a bit of money and they get very authentic looking films. There's only one group here which loses out, and that's the audience. That's us, because the films tend to be worse creatively because they're basically PR efforts on behalf of a militarized state, and also they're just politically less interesting as well.
And that's why most people in France think that the Second World War was won by the United States rather than the Red Army of the Soviet Union. And it won't be any different here in Britain, I'll warrant. Whereas in the 1940s and 50s, everybody knew that it was the Red Army that won the war, not G.I. Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was going through the things that just today, I was going through the documentation that we still don't have. And there's about 240,000 pages of notes apparently still with the Navy that we've not been able to acquire, and that's just one of the branches of the military. And one of the films that I noticed that we didn't have any information on, which is we know is definitely in one of the archives, is Saving Private Ryan. Classic film from the 1990s, which of course made it look like the Americans were the primary factor in winning the Second World War, when, of course, in reality, it was really the Russians that did it.
Now, movies are one thing, Doctor. Are they also influencing television?
Yeah, they're doing television as well. So shows like NCIS are completely rewritten from start to finish where necessary. So, for instance, when there's been plot lines about assault in the military, whole character arcs have been changed by the Department of Defense. We have the memos to demonstrate this very clearly, so that the military brass looks like it is investigating the assault against the wishes of the character who's been assaulted. You know, they care so much about having a non-racist, non-sexist military that they'll actually go over the heads of everybody to ensure, including the victim who's too scared to do anything. They'll go over the heads of them so that they do that. That's a long-running show, NCIS. But if you also think about some of the other agencies that are involved here, going back in time, I mean, look at what the FBI does. The FBI under J. Edgar Hoover in the 70s, the biggest show in the United States was called the FBI. He rewrote every single one of those 350 shows, and he made sure that there was nothing in there that offended his sensibilities, which included things like any agent having a girlfriend, anyone having any trace of homosexuality. And these are the crazy level of control that was exercised by the feds during that period. But the DoD now, Department of Defense now, does a similar thing, and the CIA has a comparable role. But then there's also other controversial police organizations as well. If you include NYPD and LAPD as well as a handful of productions that are affected by the White House directly. It's actually upwards of 10,000 titles that we're talking about.
One of the most powerful things I've seen recently on television was what purported to be the inside story of 9/11. It was called Looming Tower. It appeared to be honestly describing the internecine warfare between the different three-letter agencies in the United States. Were these spooks also involved in that?
I don't think that. I think being involved in very controversial conspiracy documentaries would be a hard sell for the Department of Defense. They have to be very careful about their image. So for instance, if you think about a film like American Sniper, which showed Chris Kyle, who was going around shooting Iraqis and shot over 100 Iraqis as a sniper fighter. This was a Clint Eastwood film from about 2013. The Department of Defense didn't want to go anywhere near that one because it was just too controversial. They like their propaganda to be really bland and boring. And it's the same thing with something like The Hurt Locker, which I'm sure you remember from 2008. They were initially interested in working on that one, but ultimately, PTSD, it's not their scene. There are films where they, of course, try and omit PTSD, where they try and take out from the script anything that shows sexism, racism, anything bad that happens to you in the Army, Navy, or any branch of the military. But with that one, because American Sniper was so baked, the controversy was so baked into the very title of it, that they couldn't do it. And similarly with the conspiracy films, I can't think of many conspiracy films, whether fiction or otherwise, where the Department of Defense is directly involved.
Now, of course, sexism and racism and transphobia and the rest, they're a big no-no for the American military, except when they're dropping their bombs and rockets on women and gay people, and no doubt trans people too. But as long as the bombs have got a rainbow on them with all the requisite colours, that makes it hunky-dory. We've talked a lot about America. Does this happen in Britain too?
Yes. In fact, I'm working with a PhD student at the moment, Tarek, on the British examples, and nothing really has been done about this except for if you go very much back into historical times to World War II. But we've found that it looks like there's a few hundred cases in Britain, including a lot of the James Bond films, which we kind of already knew, but also movies like the Kingsmen series, which is very much a kind of fantasy of recruitment, like a kind of working class kid who's sort of recruited by a kind of posh spy, played by Colin Firth, and then becomes this sort of hero. So the Kingsmen series is a good example of that. Also TV series like Spooks, and the David Schwimmer comedy Intelligence, which was set at GCHQ, was supported by MI5, for example.
Well, I wish you all the best with your research. I see we're running the title Real Power. I read a book, must be decades ago, called Real Bad Arabs, REEL, showing how Muslims and Arabs were really calumnified in films. They were painted as the very worst elements of humanity, and this was taken as for granted, was taken as normal in television and film. And sometimes it wasn't even an Arab playing the Arab. They'd put, in the way they used to do with the cowboy films, they'd put some polish on him so he could pass as Arab. I wish you all the best, Doctor. I think you're standing for Parliament, are you?
I am. I happen to be standing for a party that you probably agree with, I should think, George. It's called the Workers' Party. So
which constituency are you in?
I'm in Bath. I've been pushing very much the angle of in Bath, yeah, which is a very safe Liberal Democrat seat. But we've been pushing our Liberal Democrat frontrunner to make sure that she signs all the right things about Gaza and about foreign policy. So things like arms sales to Israel. And our group, over a period of several months, I think has had success with that. Even though she's a fairly right-wing Lib Dem, she seems to have done a lot of the right things there. But we want to keep holding her to account.
I think she used to be a Liberal councillor in Rochdale, if I'm not mistaken. I may be mixing her up. There are quite a few right-wing Liberal Democrats in Parliament. Well, look, Doctor, I wish you all the best with your parliamentary efforts tomorrow and with your continued research into real power, the power behind the screen. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Matthew Alford, film producer and researcher.